Imagine being so desperate for water that you risk your life for a sip from a muddy puddle, knowing you could be killed for it. During the Bataan Death March, American and Filipino POWs faced this exact horror, punished brutally for trying to survive. This wasn't a battle, it was a calculated act of cruelty, a war crime that shattered the rules of war. 75,000 men were forced on a nightmare journey in April 1942. Their lives changed forever. These weren't just soldiers, they were farmers, teachers, sons, and neighbors from across America and the Philippines. Their ordeal is a raw look at the true cost of conflict, stripped of any glory. Behind every historical event are real people whose lives were irrevocably changed. Understanding their suffering isn't just about honoring memory, it's about learning the truth of resilience and depravity. Today, we'll uncover what happened, why it matters, and how families and communities keep this story alive. This isn't just history, it's a warning and a lesson we can't afford to forget. To grasp the horror of the march, you need to know what led up to it. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese invaded the Philippines, trapping American and Filipino soldiers under General MacArthur. Outgunned and cut off, they retreated to the Bataan Peninsula, holding out for over 3 months on starvation rations and whatever they could forage. Disease, malaria, dysentery, beriberi ravaged the ranks. The men, skeletal and feverish, still fought on, calling themselves the battling bastards of Bataan. They were forgotten by the world, but refused to quit. On April 9, 1942, with his men starving and sick, Major General Edward King Jr. surrendered 75,000 troops, the largest surrender in American history. The men expected to be treated as POWs under the Geneva Conventions. They had no idea their real ordeal was just beginning. The battle was over, but the nightmare was about to get much worse. Their struggle for survival was only just beginning. The world as they knew it had ended. The worst was yet to come. Surrender should have ended the suffering, but it marked the start of a new torment. The Japanese, unprepared for so many prisoners, forced them to march 65 miles to Camp O'Donnell. Already starving and sick, the men were denied food and water, forced to walk under a brutal sun. Guards often stopped near water sources, forbidding the prisoners to drink. Those who tried were killed on the spot. Collapse meant death. Violence was constant and random. Trucks sometimes ran over the fallen, and executions were routine. The march lasted 5 to 10 days. Thousands died from dehydration, disease, and violence. Estimates say 650 Americans and 10,000 Filipinos perished on the road. The Bataan Death March became a 65-mile graveyard, a symbol of utter inhumanity. The suffering was relentless, the cruelty unimaginable. The world would soon learn the true meaning of the word atrocity. For those who survived, the nightmare was far from over. The road to Camp O'Donnell was only the beginning. Survival on the march wasn't about strength. It was about luck, willpower, and the man beside you. Prisoners learned to avoid eye contact with guards, stay in the middle of the column, and ignore the dying. Helping could mean death for both. Camaraderie became a lifeline. Men propped each other up, shared scraps of food and water, and refused to let friends die alone. Filipino civilians risked their lives to toss food or water to the prisoners, often facing deadly consequences. Their courage offered a glimmer of hope amid the brutality. Survival became a mental game focus on the next tree, the next bend, just one more step. Breaking the journey into small goals was the only way to endure. For those who reached Camp O'Donnell, it was sheer willpower and the refusal to surrender inwardly that carried them through. The bonds formed in those days lasted a lifetime. The march tested the limits of human endurance and humanity itself. For many, the real battle was fought in the mind. Camp O'Donnell was a new kind of hell. Built for 10,000, it held over 60,000. One water spigot served thousands. Disease and starvation killed more than the march itself. In 6 weeks, 1,500 Americans and 20,000 Filipinos died. Survivors faced daily death, meager rations, and relentless disease. The nightmare continued on hell ships, unmarked transports packed with POWs, targeted by Allied forces unaware of their cargo. Men suffocated, starved, and died in darkness. Many ships were sunk, killing thousands more. The suffering seemed endless, the cruelty inescapable. For many, liberation never came. The shadow of Bataan followed them across land and sea. The Bataan Death March was a war crime. No question. The Japanese command's systemic abuse violated every rule of war. After the war, General Hama Masaharu was tried and executed for his role, but justice was cold comfort. Survivors returned home with broken bodies and minds. Chronic illness, PTSD, and survivors' guilt haunted them. Families waited years for news, only to welcome back men forever changed. Many veterans couldn't talk about what happened. The silence created distance and pain. The legacy of Bataan was not just death, but lifelong suffering for survivors and their loved ones. The scars ran deep, shaping families and communities for generations. The consequences of cruelty echoed long after the guns fell silent. Nowhere in America did Bataan's shadow fall heavier than New Mexico. The 200th and 515th Coast Artillery units, mostly young men from small towns, were among those captured. When Bataan fell, 1,800 New Mexicans vanished into captivity. Only about 900 returned. The loss devastated families and communities statewide. Survivors came home to a world that had moved on, carrying burdens few could understand. Bataan became part of New Mexico's identity, taught in schools, honored in parks, remembered in every town. Families became keepers of the story, preserving letters and memories. For New Mexico, Bataan is personal, a legacy written in names on memorials and carried in countless hearts. The pain and pride remain, a living part of the state's culture. The march's shadow still stretches across the land of enchantment. As Bataan's survivors dwindle, a new tradition keeps their memory alive: the Bataan Memorial Death March at White Sands Missile Range. This isn't a parade, it's a grueling marathon through the desert, drawing thousands from around the world. Participants march up to 26.2 miles, some carrying heavy packs, honoring the men who had no choice. The event connects past and present. Survivors are honored, families display photos, and marchers learn the faces behind the story. Other bases and communities have adopted similar events, teaching resilience and sacrifice to new generations. The march is a living lesson in endurance and remembrance. Through sweat and struggle, participants ensure Bataan's story endures. The memory is kept alive not just in words, but in action. Every step is a tribute to those who walked before. Why keep telling this story? Because Bataan is more than a list of horrors. It's a lesson in the depths of cruelty and the heights of courage. Remembering is our responsibility, to honor the dead, the survivors, and their families. The story reminds us of the real cost of war and the importance of accountability and empathy. In a world quick to forget, Bataan teaches us to recognize and resist inhumanity. The men of Bataan left us a legacy of resilience, not victimhood. Their stories live in archives, memorials, and the hearts of those who remember. Seek them out, learn their names, share their stories. Every story told is another light against the darkness. The lesson of Bataan belongs to all of us. It's up to us to make sure it's never forgotten.